I know is diverse. But anyway, just some way to know that the educational prep programs are, at least as best as possible, keeping up with the changes that are occurring in our classrooms.
Great, thank you, Gary. Lisa.
I just have a clarification. Cheryl, when you talk about value add and connect it to quality, can you expand on that a little bit? What are you talking about when you talk about value add?
So one of the articles was looking at how to evaluate educator prep programs based on the idea of the value addedness brought to the process. And one of those examples is a value add could very easily be from day one. Students in educator prep are in the field having experiences as opposed to a little bit later. That was one of the examples that was offered in that article I'd scanned, Lisa. I think there's other elements of value add as we look at our development, and value add could be as simple as systems that encourage individuals to have those skill developments. So if we looked in our elementary education components, a recent article was around the science behind reading is not really clearly understood by too many of our teachers in the field. So a value add would certainly be the idea that I clearly digest and understand the science of reading, as opposed to the ability to work with students from the premise of reading. That could be a potential value add, is that deeper dive, which we don't always get to the levels we need. I was visiting with Conrad Wolfram this past week, and his work is all around mathematics and data science. Went on to say that what they're finding in their research is that there seems to be a decline globally around the disengagement in mathematics is at a younger and younger age all of the time. So a value add could certainly be around the methodologies of mathematics engagement, of which they're doing tremendous work. One of the thoughts he shared with me, or ideas, is that they're working on everything applicable into what they call real world problems, and doing it through something called the QUEST, Q-U-E-S-T. So those kinds of things become value adds to the development and experience of preparation. There's a few examples. Thanks for the question.
All right, anyone else? Okay, Cheryl, anything on your, should we move on?
I believe we're all committed to the end that we understand at the end of the day, the effectiveness and quality of the teacher in the classroom is the key factor in the school setting on the success and growth and development of kids, and the importance of this work, and that we all want to ensure that what is determined truly measures quality. So thanks for being here and the opportunity to visit with you for a few minutes.
All right, thank you, Cheryl. So moving into our next part for today is talking about how we want to work together, how we want to make decisions. And so thinking back again to our purpose, always going back to how do we want to work together as we make recommendations, make revisions and recommendations to the superintendent. So next slide. I want to start just talking about a little bit of logistics. We're going to be on Zoom. This is Zoom webinar, which allows others to listen in. And I was just thinking, there are some differences if you are either a panelist, which we have 16 people on today, or an attendee, and that's just simply being able to listen in. And I know, for example, I think it was McCall said, well, I don't see the waffle. Well, if you're if you're listening in, you might not have some of those Zoom capabilities. So I think that was the issue with that one. But just looking at how we want to communicate in Zoom, which I don't know about you, but it's still a challenge for me on and off. But let's just make sure we're able to do some of these things, and we'll just practice really quick. So using the chat, we did that this morning, but again, I want to just, if you will hover below, you'll see where you can mute and unmute. You'll see where you can stop your video or turn it on. You also have, and I think sometimes we don't use this, and so I want you to be aware just in case, there's a participants icon at the very bottom. And if you click that, it will give you a list of who's here. And it will also, if you click on, for example, on next to someone's name, more, that's just another place that you can send a chat directly to someone, or just see who's here. So that's another place. If you, and we know the chat, so we can click on that as well. Another one is raise hand. If everyone would just go ahead and raise their hand, I want to make sure that that's working for everyone. I've got my hand up. Great. And your hand will stay up for a while, and then it will go down, but I'll be looking for those and make sure that I can circle back. If for some reason that's not working for you, please just interrupt and unmic and just say, I have a question, or I'd like to say something, and that's fine too. I think there's a really good size of a group here. So if you do decide just to unmic, that's fine. It's not like there's 100 people on, but we will use the hand raising when appropriate. All right, and then the last one, it looks like everybody's name is on in a really clear way. So if at some point that isn't the case, there's three, if you hover over your picture, there's three little dots in the upper right-hand corner. And when you click on that, you can go down to rename, and you can go ahead and put in, you know, if you want to say where you're from or however you want to do that. Okay, next slide.
This is Laura in Lewistown. Quick question is, several of like the state people on this panel have done last name, comma, first name. Do you care if we do last name, comma, first name, or first name, last name?
I don't think it matters. I mean, just so that we have our name on there, I think we're just fine. Yep. Okay, and then how we communicate in Zoom, and I'll add, without throwing our laptops across the room. It can be frustrating. So if you're able to have your camera on, I think that's best. We're in a world of already not being able to talk as much or see each other. And so if you're able to have it on, great. I know it's an internet issue sometimes, and we've already talked about that this morning. So if your camera isn't on, I'm thinking that's probably why, where you're trying to keep some of that bandwidth, and that's fine too. All right, before I go on to the next slide, anything with how we're communicating over Zoom? Okay, and why is the hand still up? Do I have to bring it down? Yep, there we go, see? Oh. All right, next slide, how we'll work together. Cheryl talked a little bit about this last time, but just being supportive, respectful of one another, what does that look like? To me, it's just awareness of being aware of how much I'm talking, how much I'm not talking, really being engaged. We're just really wanting to be open and listen to other perspectives and ideas. So please take that opportunity while you're here. Assume the best in one another. Ask questions. I love already, we've had some great questions around what Cheryl was referring to earlier, which is great. It just shows that this can be a safe and open community working together. Next slide. As we're thinking about our purpose in working together, we'll need to have some process agreements. And so if we could go to the next slide.
Sorry, Kimberly, sometimes it's going a little slow, but. give me
Okay,
just-
yeah. So once you get there, Zach, maybe go a couple slides forward to the one that says moving the process forward. So what we'll do in this group is we'll have conversations and we'll also make decisions. We do not have the function to do breakout rooms where we can really get in and do some drafting and some deeper work. And so depending on what we decide at the end of today for our next steps, it could be that we do some work groups outside of this work and then come back, share our work. But every decision that we make as far as this is the recommendation we'll make will be done in a public forum. And so with that, how will we continue to move the process forward? Okay, next slide. And that will mean at different points where we need to reach consensus. Okay, and we'll talk in a minute how we want to do that. So when we do have a recommendation, we'll want to be sure that we have consensus to move forward. And that could be simple majority, super majority, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But when we do reach consensus, I want to take a minute to have agreement around what that would mean. And I've put a few things up here. So consensus in making a decision, a recommendation for Chapter 58 does not mean that it's unanimous, as we know. Not everybody will always agree, but we do want to agree on what consensus means. And I just put down that we can live with the decision, that we'll support the decision that the majority of our colleagues make in moving forward, and that I won't personally do anything to impede the implementation of the decision. So I want to just pause for a minute. Thoughts or questions about what we've put up here as a definition for consensus. Okay, and then again, when we do make a decision for a recommendation, it will always be reached in a public forum. Okay, next slide. All right, and there's a couple ways we can do this when we do have a recommendation, a revision to 58. We could do simple majority, right? So we vote and a simple majority would be greater than 50% of us agree. We could do super majority, which is greater than 60% of us agree. Or if we want to have more of that, those in agreement, we could say all agree, and we could have one dissenter, or we could say all agree and we have two dissenters. Okay, so I'm going to pause for like questions or clarifications, and then what I would like to do is actually vote on which one of these we would like to use for that decision making. Gary.
Yes. Yeah, I'm curious about the process. Will you, say during a discussion on a particular point, will you assess the people on the meeting, kind of what their position is, and if there's one or two dissenters, will the process allow those people to express their reason for dissenting and allow the group to discuss it further to see if full consensus can be established? Or will we simply, when it's time to take a vote, we just take a vote, and if there are dissenters, then their views are not heard?
No, absolutely, Gary. What I would recommend is as we're in discussion, that we don't even go to like a vote until everybody has had the opportunity to express how their feelings. We're probably going to have a good idea, and then we'll say, should we call for a vote? When we've used this process in the past, and there have been those that are dissenters, we've always paused to then say to the group, should we hold off? Should we bring more discussion? And so it's not going to be just super cut and dry, you know, moving on. If there's more to say, we'll definitely circle back to the group and discuss more. Lisa,
Thank
what are
you.
you? Yes, you bet, Gary.
I just have a couple clarifications. How many people are voting in each on each issue, and what happens if somebody who is participating isn't there that day? Do we wait, or do we say, too bad you're not here, you lose?
That's a great comment. What do you all think on that? We can do whatever. We've got today, for example, like voting members, there's 16 people on, and I think there are 13 that would be considered voting. So minus Cheryl, minus myself, minus Zach, and minus Tristan. What do you all think? Maybe we say these are things, maybe we bring to this group, these are the things we're going to actually decide on. And bring their votes. I'm just going to pause and see what you all think about that. Kirk, yes.
So I may have missed this at the first meeting, and I apologize for not being able to attend, but the actual membership of the task force, I'm not sure that that's clearly defined. You said that there's 13 that are on here. Is that the total task force group? And that's probably who should be voting on the issues. And, you know, I think being present to vote is probably what I would recommend. And that if there are votes that maybe you could leave the vote for somebody who is unable to attend that given meeting as a proxy with another one of the committee or the task force members.
And I'm going to ask Zach on that one, is how many exactly do we have on the task force? Looks like there's about 12 or 13 on today.
Let me pull up the list really quick and I'll get back to you on that, Kimberly.
Okay. And then what I hear Kirk saying is, just to summarize, the possibility of you need to be present to vote, or another option Kirk brought up was, you know, by proxy, being able to give your vote through, maybe it's in writing or something beforehand, or something that we can document, I think will be important. Susan.
I was just going to add that I think you have to be present to vote, because if you're not present, then you're not participating in the full discussion about an issue. I don't think it would be fair if all I did was read documents and then emailed my vote in. I think you've actually got to be present to vote.
Okay, thank you, Susan. Gary,
Yeah, I would just add on to that. I think it's difficult because we may have people that, I mean, legitimately can't attend a meeting with a vote may take place. So not knowing exactly how many, what the total number of voters is, at least at this point. But I think if, if we have a majority of people on in a meeting and those attending would be those voting on that based on the discussion held that day. And I think just allowing that process, it's somewhat simple because I think our timeline seems relatively tight. So I think just considering that on what decisions we have to make, how many decisions we have to make, which I don't know. I think having a process that's pretty clear that those on the meeting will be voting, and the way that vote goes, that's the way it goes.
yeah, that makes me think about a super majority, because if we have, so Zach put in the chat, there are 18 members, and say we have 12 or 13 on today, so that would be a super majority as we vote, and there still could be some dissenters. So that's a possibility. I see in the chat, Mary said vote by email or Google Forms. So that's another idea. I'm going to call on Jennifer.
Hi, thank you. I'm not sure. I would struggle a little bit with have to be present to vote because some of us are working full year. I'm in the middle of a native summer academy with 50 kids right now. So I stopped that to come and attend. So I may not always be able to step away and be able to do this. We had difficulty getting someone else from Macy to step in to attend these simply because it's a summer initiative and people have a lot going on. I also know that there's a couple of times when I know I'm going to be traveling, which doesn't mean I won't be following what's happening. It just means I may not be able to be present in the moment.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. Gary?
Sorry, I forgot to lower my hand.
Okay. All right. All right. So I'm going to pause just one more minute here. Anyone else? All right. So I'm hearing a couple things. The comment about voting by email. Because we want this to be a public forum when we're making decisions, that might not be a good option. And same with Google Forms. So as we convene as the official task force together, that's where I would recommend the votes taking place. Let's see. I think, and then this is Barbara. I think we need, this is in the chat. I think we need to be present to vote. We need to hear the conversation to make an informed decision. Maybe we determine a quorum size for voting. Okay, and that again, that could go back, Barbara, to the supermajority, where we could say there are 18. We're always 18. If there's 13 on, we have a supermajority and we could still vote. If we say only one dissenter, then we would have to say of those on, because we're all not going to be on, all 18 at one point. We have lives. As my friend would say, we have lives and laundry. Okay, and I see Mary put in, listen to the recording. Okay, and that's great. And that goes back to what Cheryl talked about last week of engagement. You know, if we do miss, you know, making sure that we're listening to the recording, doing our homework so that we're prepared. Okay, so what I would like to recommend is that we just take a vote right now, unless there's other discussion on how we want to come to consensus when we have a decision and when we're ready to put that up to decide. So here are our choices: simple majority, and the first two would be, this is the 18 of us, whether we're on or not. So a simple majority present for who's on. So that's 50% or higher, or sorry, that's simple, or a super 60% or more. Only one dissenter, and that would be for those present because it is a public forum, or 2 dissenters. Okay, any other discussion before we vote on how we want to reach consensus? Okay, if you would put into the chat, simple, super, only one, or only 2. Those are our 4 choices. And Zach, if you could watch those, and Tristan, and that would be great. I'll watch it too, but would love another set of eyes. Okay, it looks like almost all are saying super. Okay, and so we definitely have overwhelmingly, the vote is for a super majority. Lisa made a suggestion. Lisa, would you unmic and share your suggestion with us?
I think it's really important that we all agree and we understand the issue and we understand the conversation and we all agree on what we're actually recommending. So my thought is a super majority, but we want to make sure that we have just about everybody on the Zoom meeting before we vote. So if we need to postpone a vote for a week, then we should be able to do that. To me, the result we want is that we all can live with this decision. Everybody, all 18.
Okay, and so with that, Lisa, your specific suggestion was a quorum of 12. Okay, so
I picked 12 because that's 66% of 18, which is right around 60%.
okay, yeah.
I have no investment in the particular number. We could make it
Okay.
15.
No, that was good. Yep, got it. All right. Do we agree with what Lisa is saying? I mean, maybe just if your camera's on, you can do a thumbs up. If not, a virtual, or I guess we have to raise our hands. We don't have our thumbs up button. Yep, and I think that's great. I love the way you phrased that, Lisa. Just we want the conversation to be complete. We want full agreement. If there are 1 or 2 that are dissenters, we go back to consensus and what that means, that yes, we can still support. And if they can't, like, we need to have more conversation, right? And so making sure that everybody's comfortable in moving forward, even if it's not just the way I want it, so I'm going to dissent, I'm still comfortable and will support going forward. So our decision as a group is that we will have a super majority, which is 12, as we do have decisions coming forward, but that as a group, at any point, we can say, let's hold off, let's have more conversation. We also want to make sure as we go into a task force meeting that we know that decisions are coming up so that they're well thought out, so that we can make sure everybody can be present if possible. All right, next slide. And Cheryl, I'm going to pass it over to you for the MAPA timeline.
Thank you. I appreciate just a few minutes on this one and the assistance of McCall in making certain that we understand the process. So it will take 3 Board of Public Ed meetings for us to finalize the recommendations that we bring forward. That doesn't mean one recommendation at a time, but just trying to give the context. So anticipating that September Board of Public Ed may very well be the first meeting with recommendations from the team. It would take us through that process of January before any rule changes were adopted and published by the Secretary of State. And I'll put this out for everyone. So in looking at that, when we look at the November meeting, that would be March before Secretary of State published any changes to rule. And then January takes us to May on that. So for all intents and purposes, when we think about the work we have ahead of us, we should anticipate that September, November, January are our Board of Public Ed targets. Once we get into the March meeting, we would be into end of July and August before that process completed. So again, the discussion around the importance of the work, the importance of the team, also wanted you to be keenly aware that as we look at the process called the MAPA process, as McCall had shared, it takes 3 meetings of the Board of Public Ed in order to move that fully through the cycle of requirements. So September, November, January would be our Board of Public Ed meetings for recommendations from the task force.
All right, thoughts, questions? All right, thank you, Cheryl.
Yeah, thank you, folks.
This next part is diving into the work. And so we're starting with our revision of chapter 58. Zach, will you give us just kind of a brief overview of the chapters and then we'll jump in?
You bet. And thank you for being here today, everybody. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. For those of you that don't know me, I'm the Director of Indian Ed for All here at the Office of Public Instruction. And Cheryl has asked me to help co-facilitate on behalf of the OPI. So excited to be here and sort of dive into the work with everybody today. And so what I'm going to do, part of my role with this is going to be to sort of try to chunk out chapter 58 in a way that we can kind of go through it and allow for, robust discussion and sharing of thoughts and ideas, but attack any revisions and kind of follow the procedures and protocols that we've kind of outlined today. But with the idea that we will be on track to have this process completed by October. And so today, I'm just going to focus on subchapters 1 and 3. And the idea would be the next time we'll kind of focus on subchapter 5, which is more of the sort of the subject area knowledge and skills for the different subject areas of the EPPs. So what I have done is just kind of gone through and in collaboration with Kimberly and visiting with Cheryl a little bit, and kind of put some sort of overarching sort of big picture questions for thought, reflection, and discussion. And then Kimberly will kind of help facilitate sort of the deeper dive into any potential verbiage change or revisions that we want to sort of entertain. And again, respecting that at any point, if we need to put something off so that people can reflect on it, or we want to loop other members of the task force in before we make any critical decisions or that sort of thing, we will respect that process. But my role is really to kind of help just facilitate that we move through this and we discuss these things, and kind of putting out some bigger picture sort of questions for folks to think about. So before we kind of talk about subchapter 1, are there any questions, comments, concerns about that? Okay. In that case, so subchapter 1 is pretty straightforward. It basically just, it looks like Susan has her hand up. Go ahead, Susan. I think you're muted.
That was an error. That was my hand on my keyboard, sorry.
Okay, all right, no problem. So subchapter 1 is just the procedural standards. So how do we do this process of reviewing, these accreditation chapters every 7 years? What's everybody's role? How is the task force selected? What are kind of the guiding principles for this process? And so, I did hear earlier a little bit of, we want to make sure that as we do this, that the end goal is that we are creating, quality educators who are knowledgeable and proficient practitioners in the current educational landscape. And that's our ultimate goal, because we know that's what's going to benefit our students and our public education system to the fullest extent. So we'll just entertain some thoughts and discussions around, does this process, just this basic sort of administrative and procedural process, does this fit the current landscape and the needs of our state? It looks like Gary's got his hand up. Go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, thanks for this. I guess the only thought I have right now and looking at this is, and I don't know, this may already be in the chapter, but really focusing on the Constitution and the effort that districts are making around the state to focus on serving every child, every student in the classroom, which gets into the differentiated instruction component and a lot of behavioral issues, et cetera. But I'm just curious, is that something that would be a foundational component of this, to focus on the effort being made in compliance with the Constitution about meeting the needs of every student?
So I'm not sure that would, in my mind, that might be more of a conversation when we get to subchapter 3, because that does get more into sort of what are those skills, knowledge, proficiencies, how do we ensure quality educators? Maybe there's something we want to put in the overview that gets to that when we talk about just the general administrative procedures, maybe outlining, just the purpose of the work, the goal that you articulate, Gary, that every student has quality education and equality of opportunity. But I'll just wait to hear other folks' thoughts on that.
It looks like Susan has her hand up.
Okay.
Oh, Susan, she's shaking her head. Did you? That's
I'm
okay.
sorry.
That's
I've
okay.
got this convoluted setup here.
No, that's okay. All right.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. To add on to what Zach is referring to, we did put in the chat again the chapter 58, which I know you've all read and you're familiar with. In that subchapter 1, another way to think about this question. So does the current EPP accreditation process, because subchapter 1 talks about the actual process for accreditation, does it fit the educational landscape and state educational needs? When you actually look at the chapter and we think about our task of making any revisions or recommendations, and another thing to think about, maybe we could throw out, is what already does OPI do well, because they're tasked with, right, going to the universities, going through that process for accreditation. What is going well in that, and what isn't going well that we could look at possibly revising?
Yeah, thank you for that, Kimberly. And also think about, thinking about the roles. We, the OPI, or, we're the overseer of the K-12 system. We are sort of, I don't want to use the word dictating, but we are sort of setting the standards by which, our post-secondary institutions, which are under the Board of Regents, that they need to meet, because ultimately their graduates are practitioners within the K-12 system. Is that the appropriate role? Is 7 years a good timeline, for revision? Are there particular ways that we might think about how we, put together these task force? Is there good representation in the task force? Do we need to have things in there to ensure that there's, more diverse representation? I mean, these are maybe some of the questions that I would say might kind of center around subchapter 1. It looks like Kieran has her hand raised, and Curtis, but let's go Kieran first.
I just have hopefully what will be a quick question. Do we know what the 7 years, the thought process behind that? Is there something that I might not know, I'm sure I don't. If there's something that happens every 7 years that necessitates waiting 7 years. It seems like a long time to me is all I'm thinking.
I'm scrolling back up here. But while I'm doing that, who was the other person that had their hand up?
It's like Curtis.
Okay,
Yes.
go ahead.
Thanks, Zach. I did. I mean, I think at least from smaller institutions' perspective, we were NCAID accredited a number of years ago, probably now 15 years ago, chose not to for some reasons, mostly related to cost and the challenges. So when we go for OPI accreditation through EPP, we're following the same standards as CAPE does. And we have, state visitors, and on occasion, if we're doing CAPE, the larger institutions are CAPE accredited. Smaller institutions, for the most part, aren't, depending on costs. We see more tribal colleges developing those same concerns or same challenges. it probably would be nice to, if this group mandated, at least in my little mind, and that's all it is let's do CAPE and make it happen and make the support, allow that to occur in a structured and supportive way. It seems sometimes we fall over ourselves. I'm not sure that's terribly effective.
And Curtis, just for our those listening in, I'm getting a few little messages. Can you talk a little bit about CAPE and what that is?
Yeah, counselor accreditation, education preparation. I think I have that right. Let me,
Yeah, that is correct. And
so we have these two groups going together. OPI is trying to follow it. We're trying to follow it. I know the Council of Deans, and since there's deans on the council or on this group, they can speak to that much better than I can. But from a smaller institution view that does address rural Montana, I think as well as anybody does, as far as getting teachers to rural Montana, those are considerations that we need to have at least a thoughtful conversation of, rather than falling over ourselves or rebuilding the wheel every time we do it. Obviously, at least in theory, with continuous improvement. But I think that may be in language, perhaps more than in practice.
And to stay with that same topic, Curtis, I'm looking at subchapter 1, and under accreditation site reviews, number 2, it states joint accreditation site reviews in cooperation with the Council of Accreditation, which is CAPE, will be encouraged. Are you suggesting more involvement or with CAPE? Right now, I know as it stands with the OPI for accreditation. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, in my mind, it's as a lowly faculty member, I don't make those hard decisions, but I know if it said accreditation must be achieved through CAPE, period, done, we would make a decision to either do it or not do it. And I think those decisions are easier, yes or no, if you want to be accredited in the state of Montana. If you don't, then you don't. We have, in some ways, plenty of teacher preparation programs in Montana. We graduate more than enough people in theory to serve the needs of Montana. Is that Bozeman, Missoula, Billings, they don't come to rural Montana for the most part. We've been working, and Kirk knows this, we've been working on grow our own and some of those kinds of ideas and strategies, but that hasn't materialized to the degree of that we would have hoped for. Salary scales, all those kinds of things sort of fall into that also. But so I think a conversation, do we want to continue in this sort of mixed half, jointly approved, dedicated, having Linda or Linda's replacement make that happen? Or do we say, no, let's just go with CAPE? It's already done. Why are we doing something again?
it looks like Susan has her hand raised.
Yeah, I thought I'd better do one that was not a mistake. So there was a good question about every 7 years, and that does seem a long time. However, there is a lot of work that goes into preparing for a visit by the state and any outside CAPE reviewer. So I think that that's probably one of the reasons that it's that somewhat arbitrary timeline. I think if it were any shorter, it might increase the burden on the state reviewers too, to get around all the institutions every 5 years. So I'm assuming there was just that part of a organizational decision. But I mean, we have our next review in a couple of years, and we've been working constantly for the past 2 years on preparing for this visit.
Okay, thank you for that. Susan, go ahead. Kirk Miller has his hand raised.
I just would make comment on a couple of the things that are on the table right now. That the process of the 7-year review cycle was one in which the last time Chapter 58 was reviewed, as well as Chapter 55, 56, and 57, that the staffing required to be able to do these kinds of reviews was very intense, and the ability of the Board of Public Ed to be dealing with the review of all the chapters. That's why a cycle of 7 years was put in place. And so historically, 2 decades worth that's been worked on, and the 7-year cycle is what that agreement was, so that there would be appropriate staffing to be able to do a deep review like we're doing right now. And then the foundation of the joint accreditation site reviews in 1058-103, if you have that pulled up, there was some discussion that Curtis, brought that to the table, that joint accreditation site reviews in cooperation with CAPE will be encouraged. That sentence literally is in the rule during the last review of Chapter 58 as a result to try to cooperate and not have the ed prep programs, which, we're listening to Susan and others and Curtis about how intense it is when the review actually happens for the educator prep program on their site. And so if you were a member of CAPE, the goal of that statement was to encourage that there would be a cooperative effort and you wouldn't have a CAPE review as well as a state accreditation review. And so in my opinion, I think that still is okay, and it gives the ability to not double down on that unit of the ed prep program that has to go through that review process. So I would suggest that we continue to do that. Maybe we could strengthen the language so that, again, you're not imposing on the educator prep program in that unit of the university system, but cooperating at the state level to make sure the review is done as effectively and efficiently as possible.
All right, thanks for that, Kirk. Are there any other thoughts about this particular issue? Okay, so what I think I'm hearing is that as a group, we're comfortable with sort of that language in 1058-103 that just says that we are encouraged to cooperate with the CAPE standard, and then also that 7 years, while it might seem like a long time, is probably appropriate given the capacity of everyone to do this process.
Okay, and I'll add on, Zach, that I also heard a suggestion for possibly strengthening the language around that joint accreditation site reviews. It says encouraged. So that was one thing I heard, is the possibility of strengthening that language. And then the other thing I want to circle back to was that I believe it was Curtis that again talked about the role of CAPE and should it be a greater role. So those are two things I want to circle back to see if there's any more comments, or do we want to, what do we want to do with this? Do we want to just say it's fine, let's pass it? Do we want to think about it, come back to it next time? Kieran. And then Curtis.
So I don't know if Curtis is gonna talk about what I was about to say. I don't know that we actually had a conversation about I believe what Curtis was trying to say was, or I think what I was hearing was that we needed to have a conversation about, do we need a stronger language than encouraged to do that? And so that's all I was going to throw out there.
All right, thank you for that. Go ahead, Curtis. You're muted, Curtis.
Sorry about that. I agree with, Kirk is exactly right. That encouragement and stronger language would be helpful. And, we're working on accreditation almost continually. As soon as you're done, you're trying to do what needs to be done again. And maybe this isn't the conversation, but with the number of institutions we have, support at various institutional levels may be helpful, and that's not certainly for OPI to direct, but there may be some ways of minimizing when you have a faculty of less, a half dozen or less, and then some of them are, others are adjuncts, etc., and that you're meeting the same standards, which is appropriate, as CAPE or the Office of Public Instruction, with all the complications of that, meeting it to the same standards, it becomes a challenge. I've been through this process 3 or 4 times myself, and I can honestly admit, not this past time, but the time before is my worst experience in higher ed ever. That was not a good feeling on any kind of way. And then, while you get reviewed and you have another opportunity, and it kind of drags on like I'm not sure what the right word is, but it drags on, and you're trying to meet the standards. I mean, it's a challenging process to I think do it in this manner. Are there other ways to make it stronger? I think there are. My second question is related for Cheryl, I guess, because I've heard this from everybody. No, that's just not everybody, but that the superintendent had expressed some interest in moving teacher accreditation out of OPI to Office of the Commissioner. I just wanted to ask that question because I'd heard that, and somebody had asked me that, is that what's going to happen? I said, I don't know. So that's a question.
Well, I can't speak for the superintendent. What I can say is nobody's told me that is her desire. I guess there is maybe a philosophical question about if I'm an engineering faculty, as far as content in the K-12 system, could I say what should a student who might be interested in engineering be learning in math and science in the 3rd grade? And would that be more or less appropriate than the current process? And that's sort of just a more of a big picture philosophical question that I don't know if anybody has interest in discussing or not.
So I want to bring us, oh, go ahead.
Does somebody have their hand up?
Oh, I thought someone was jumping in. Oh, I think it's just an echo. I want to bring us back to subchapter 1, the 1058-102, the process leading to accreditation. One of the things that Curtis really emphasized was that the process wasn't pleasant, and we don't need it to be pleasant, but it was stressful. And I want to ask this question: what would make it better? So for those of you that are on that have gone through the process, this is a great opportunity because the process is laid out. Is there something within there? And maybe it's in the standards where there's so many or whatever, so we can hold off on that. But when you look at the actual process, are there things that would make it better that either aren't in Chapter 58 already, or that could be emphasized? And what I think, oh, go ahead, Curtis.
I hate to be dominating this conversation. But I think one thing that could be beefed up on, I mean, it's a challenge. I respect that and know that, but if you look at 1058-102 subsection B, the superintendent of public instruction shall conduct workshops and prepare educators to serve as a team members of site reviews. That could, I mean, on a yearly basis, regularly, might be some improvements in that, you know, for doing the joint group, it's sort of the CAPE folks and the OPI folks and other folks that are going to be examiners in many ways, an old term, would be helpful, because on occasion, I don't think everyone is on the same page. So increased training, making sure that those expectations are knowing the standards, and then being able to write to those standards after they've been reviewed, I think are all important pieces to that. And I realize that's a challenge, but and then sometimes too, the size of an institution. So we may have a small institution going to a larger institution, someone that's an examiner, accreditor, and vice versa. And those two things are different. I know when I served as an NCATE examiner going to a large institution, that's a pretty big deal compared to a smaller institution. So those nuances are certainly the case in Montana. I know at a recent visit, it was difficult to get examiners that had experience in actually doing accredited review. So, and I guess I've felt perhaps that it can be a bit of a crapshoot.
So it sounds like, Curtis, you would be in favor of some possible changes to Part B, but I see there's some other hands raised, so let's hear from those folks. Let's see. Kimberly, can you see who that
Yes.
is?
Susan, did you want to share something there?
Having been through a few reviews at MSU Billings, I have found meeting with the visiting evaluators to be the most useful. At our last CAPE review, I was surprised how very general their questions were. They spend an awful lot of time looking at the paperwork. I mean, we have to provide documentation of every meeting that we have, from program level, department level, college level, and all of the decisions that are made. We have to provide them all of that stuff. That's the minutiae of what we have to provide, obviously. And it just seems that they spend, it would be nice if it could be balanced out, so there was an equal amount of time spent talking to the faculty. There is time allowed for that. They also have time where they speak to graduates of our programs, and that's really helpful. I think just in terms of the stress that's generated by this, it's just having outside people come and look at your program. it's important. I would not agree to the abolishment of this, because I think, we're public institutions and we have a responsibility to have people come in and ensure that we that the work that we're covering meets the state standards. I do think with our PEP standards, for example, in special education and even our on-site, our assessment coordinator at the university level has said that they seem to be that each standard encompasses a wide range of skills, and so maybe those need to be teased out. So maybe we need more standards, but there's less in each one. But I know that's something she's commented on. She doesn't have a background in special education. She has a background in working on assessment and learning outcomes for different programs, but she's noticed that certainly with our special ed, that they seem to be very global.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan. I'm going to pause us. I'm looking at the time. We have had a good start today, good conversation. What I would like to suggest is that Zach and I meet. Tristan is taking minutes today. And so we will look at some of those topics that have come up that we'll be able to look at a little bit deeper before our next meeting. So we'll put some of those questions and topics, for example, around the 7 years, around the actual process, the size of the institution. We heard a lot of really good things. We'll send those out so that you all can kind of get into the actual chapter and look at specifically what could we revise to address some of these concerns so that it's a better process, and then come back having done a little bit of homework around that. Does that sound okay for kind of a next step, so that we can come back, discuss, and either we'll decide to make a decision or we'll table it for after we go through the standards, because maybe that will change the process. And then I'm going to hand it over to Zach for just some logistics around dates, because next week is the 24th, and then we have the July 1st meeting. So Zach.
Yeah, and yeah, so we'll just disregard the chapter 5 stuff. I think we need to stay right now in subchapter 1 and hash some of these things through, and that's great. It's a robust conversation. It's an important conversation, and so we will have it. There was a question that came up. Well, a couple things. So next week is the OPI summer conference, and so we just wanted to sort of get a pulse on if there is going to be a bunch of folks in attendance of that, and if that would hinder our ability to have a quorum, to have our minimum of 12 members. So I guess maybe just real quick, show of hands of people who would be here next Thursday. We're planning to be here. Okay. 9, I'm showing 9. So almost everybody that's here today, and we are missing 5 folks. So I'm going to assume that we will go ahead and meet next Thursday unless someone wants to voice a strong objection. Okay. And then the other one is July 1st. Just again, people have lives. That is the 4th of July weekend. And just not, if we have a lot of folks who have plans to do a long weekend or something and won't be in attendance, we wanted to put that question out as well. So maybe same process, who plans to be here on July 1st? Okay. Looks like just about everybody that's here today. So, so we'll just plan to proceed on those dates. Just a quick point, I will actually be on vacation next week. So Cheryl will be taking my role next week, but I will be back on the 1st. I look forward to seeing everyone then. And if you have questions, comments, concerns, anything regarding my role or with the OPI as co-facilitator, feel free to shoot me an email or call me. My information is there. Thank you again for being here and doing this important work. It really is an honor and a privilege to be a part of it. Do you have anything, Kimberly, before we close out?
Not at all. Thank you so much. And you'll be seeing an email coming from Zach just on kind of our homework so that we can be prepared for next week. Thank you and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
See you, everybody.
Yeah.
Yep, thank you. Bye.